Good morning, everybody. Once again, I welcome you all to this online series of lectures. As discussed in the previous set of lectures, we decided that we are going to record these lectures for the students who might not be able to come to the classes, who might use this as a resource. And that's why we are continuing with this series. Now, these 2-3 lectures are going to be about a wonderful poem by Langston Hughes. The title of that poem is Mother to Son. This is one of the most well-known poems of American literature, and certainly a very important poem which came out from what is popularly known as the Harlem Renaissance. So before I begin with the poem, let us talk a little bit about the poet. Let us try to situate the poet. And then maybe we'll, when we discuss the poem in detail, we'll be able to elaborate on this particular situating of the poet. So Langston Hughes was born in 1902 in Joplin, Missouri. Hughes was a very important figure in what we call or what we know as Harlem Renaissance. I shall elaborate on this idea of Harlem Renaissance afterwards. So he was a poet, a very well-known novelist, playwright and essayist who gave authentic voice to the African American experience. Born in the year 1902 and he died in the year 1967. So before we dive deep into this particular poem, let us first of all try to understand the milieu in which this poem appears. So, as students of American literature, we are quite aware of the history of America as a nation. America as a nation came into existence on 4 July 1776 when the Declaration of Independence was signed by the representatives of the 13 colonies. And so these 13 disparate colonies actually came into being as a nation. They came together and they formed a nation. And this particular idea of nation based on certain principles is a very novel idea. In fact, if we try to understand the history of nationalism in Europe, then you would see that nation as a construction is deeply rooted in one religion, one language, one race thing. America becomes an exception in many regards. One of the most important things as to why the Declaration of Independence is important in the history of America in particular and in the history of human race in general, that it was America as a nation came into being not on the basis of one race, one religion or one culture kind of a thing, but the founding fathers of America believed in certain set of principles, and they said that we, to quote Thomas Jefferson's famous document, we hold these truths to be self-evident, and then he goes on elaborating what are the fundamental rights of human beings. So the foundation of America as a nation is actually based on equality, freedom, liberty, such principles. But there is that famous saying, we all talk the talk, but who will walk the walk? So America as a nation started off on these noble and was founded on these noble truths. But in reality, the tradition of slavery, the institution of slavery, so to say, was deeply rooted in America because the agrarian economy required labor, and the Atlantic slave trade contributed a great deal in providing that labor in the American markets. So there was a lot of presence of African American people on the American soil who were not even treated as human beings. They were treated as property. Now, this is not a lecture on American history. Otherwise, we would have entered deep into this discussion suffice it is to say that racism, the racial discrimination, is one of the features of America as a nation. America, as I've already told you, came into being on the basis of some noble truths, but at the same time, the tradition of slavery, the institution of slavery, has greatly marred this particular enterprise. So, after Civil War, Emancipation of Proclamation by the greatest of American presidents of all, Abraham Lincoln, slavery was abolished, but the black population was never given the equal status. Civil War was followed by the Project of Reconstruction. Reconstruction was followed by the Jim Crow laws, the infamous Jim Crow laws, which completely undid the project of abolition of slavery and the project of Reconstruction. So, the onset of Jim Crow laws created a segregated America. Now, what do I mean by this? These laws divided each and everything between two races. Public places were divided. Certain areas were not allowed for blacks. Even in the bus, in the public transport, certain seats were reserved for the whites only, and certain seats were reserved only for the blacks only. So the policy of segregation was actually a reality in America. So on this background comes a particular phenomenon which we call as Harlem Renaissance. So the blacks who were living in a small by then a locality in New York City called Harlem, they gathered together. There was a lot of ideological churning, and Alan Locke, that famous philosopher, came up with the idea called the New Negro, and it was a kind of declaration of intellectual independence. So what happened in Harlem Renaissance was the black population decided to reinvent themselves in artistic means, in philosophical means, in creative and cultural means. So Harlem Renaissance is a term which we use to describe that cultural effervescence which took place in 1920s and 1930s in a place called Harlem. So Langston Hughes was one of the major figures of Harlem Renaissance. Now let us talk about the poem. The title of the poem, Mother to Son. This particular poem was written in the year 1922. It is composed during the early Harlem Renaissance, a period of extraordinary African American artistic flourishing. This is apparently a simple poem, but this poem is deeply rooted into the milieu of that particular times. Now this poem is actually about a mother talking to the son, and the mother is trying to give some advice to the son, where she uses a particular metaphor. She uses a metaphor of a staircase. She kind of compares her life with a staircase, and then she talks about her experience of leaving that life, the life which was full of struggle, the life which is full of hardships. That is what she is talking about in this poem. And when we go to the poem, then I'll talk about the language of that particular poem, which is very, very important. So a poem which was written in the year 1922, and this particular poem is written, and if you look at the language which is used by Langston Hughes in this particular poem, it's not standard English. It is a dialect which was spoken by the African American community living in this kind of ghettos. And this poem, it's a rebellion. One should look at some of the similar examples in other poetic traditions. Now, the choice of language made by poet is a very important phenomenon for me, because if you decide to write in standard English, then you are actually depriving the speaker of the agency. So, the choice of using a particular dialect by Langston Hughes is actually a political step. Now, in what way it is a political step? I believe that the deliberate choice of this dialect is an attempt to give an agency to the speaker of the poem. And I'm using the word agency in the philosophical sense of the term. Agency which was denied to the Afro-American population living in America by racism. So the choice of language is also an important phenomenon here. I'll read out the poem first, and then we'll talk about the certain words in this particular poem, and I'll elaborate on my point. The speaker in the poem says, "Well, son, I'll tell you, life for me ain't been no crystal stair. It had tacks in it, and splinters, and boards torn up, and places with no carpet on the floor, bare. But all the time it has been climbing on, reaching landings, and turning corners, and sometimes going in the dark, where there ain't been no light. So boy, don't you turn back, don't you sit down on the steps, cause you find it's kinda hard. Don't you fall now, for I still going honey, I'm still climbing, and life for me ain't been no crystal stair." Now, dear students, you already are studying English, you know what is grammatically correct English. So if you could just look at the text of the poem, you could see that there are so many grammatical mistakes here, that there are certain words which are contracted, certain forms are used. But as I've already told you, that this is a deliberate choice made by Langston Hughes. Now, as students of poetry, we need to distinguish between the poet and the speaker in the poem. The poet is one who writes the poem, the speaker is one who speaks in the poem. So the speaker of this particular poem is an African American woman who is talking to her son. And this African American woman who's deprived of all the opportunities in life, no education, no job, no security, no identity as such, is actually talking to her son. And while talking to her son, she's using the language which is the language of her everydayness, her everyday life which is full of hardships, her everyday life which is full of difficulties, problems, hardships, and the milieu in which she lives. She has combined these two things, and that is why this poem has become such a powerful piece of poetry. Now, if you could look at some of the phrases which are used here, which you might find that they are grammatically wrong, they are not acceptable forms of English. For example, ain't. For example, contractions like instead of saying climbing, there is a word climbing. Instead of reaching, the word is reaching. Landing, instead of landing, the word is landings. Such words. Or I, instead of I have been still climbing, I still climbing. So this is a deliberate choice on the part of the poet. And I hope my point, which I am taking extra efforts to elaborate, that this choice of language is not mere artistic. Of course, the first impulse to choose your medium is artistic, but at the same time, for black literature, in which, and especially black literature of the early phase, where the protest, the spirit of protest is very, very prominent. So this choice of language is a political statement that has been made by the poet. Okay, so if the poem is very simple actually. If you could just look at the poem, then it's very simple. The language is not that difficult. What is happening in the poem? Just look at, let us try to analyze this poem on the superficial level. So when we read the poem, we come to know that there is an old lady who's talking to her son. So it is a kind of monologue. Mono means one, log means speech. So one person is speaking to the other person. This person speaking is the mother who's talking to her son, and if you could read, she says that her life, because she uses a metaphor of stair. She says that life for me ain't been no crystal stair. So this particular image of crystal stair. Now the image of stair is a metaphor for life. And she says that when my life hasn't been a crystal stair, what she means to say that her life was not a comfortable experience like climbing the crystal stair, but instead of that, her life, the stair of her life, had tacks in it. She says that it had splinters. There were places where boards were torn up, and places where there was no carpet and the floor was bare. So if you could look at the images which she has used in this particular poem. So first of all, try to understand the situation. A mother is speaking to her son. The mother compares her life to stair, and she says that this particular stair which she's been climbing is not an easy one. It had its problems, and that is why when she uses the metaphor of stair, she uses imagery which is full of harsh realities. When she says that the stair which she had to climb had tacks in it, it had splinters, the boards were torn up, there were places where there were no carpet and the floor was bare. It means that her life has been full of all hardships, problems, difficulties. And this particular feature was experienced by all the Afro-American population of that particular time. And why just say that particular point in time? Even today, the situation hasn't improved a great deal. We are still dealing with the menace of racism on the American soil. So if you could look at the images which she has used, the first image is that of crystal stair. She says that my life hasn't been a crystal stair. Now crystal stair is a stair which you climb on very comfortably, and you in fact enjoy that particular stair. But she says that it hasn't been crystal stair. So what kind of a stair it had been? It is kind of wooden stair where there were tacks, where there were splinters, where there was bare floor, and it has been a very difficult journey for her. So the imagery which is used in the first part of the poem actually underlines the experience of the lever. The person who is speaking, the speaker in the poem, is actually that African American mother who's talking about her life, her experiences, which are full of hardships, problems, doubts and difficulties. And then in the next part, she actually says, when she narrates, when she equates her life with the stair and recounts how that journey has been so far, she says, but all the time I've been climbing on, despite of all these odds, despite of all these difficulties, these problems, she hasn't stopped climbing up. She is still climbing, and she says that the climb, the process of climbing has been a very rewarding one internally, because she says that I've been reaching landings. There are places where she could stop and catch her breath, let us say. I've been turning corners. There were places when it appeared that her life might take another turn for good, turn for, let us say, surprises. And sometimes going in the dark, but at times she completely lost her path. where there had been no light and there was nobody to guide her. There was no light, there was no beacon of hope. Let us say light is the symbol of hope in poetry. So boy, don't you turn back. So she says that despite of all these difficulties, she has been climbing up. She's still climbing on. There were pleasant experiences, but majority of her experiences were full of problems and hardships. And she says that, and that is why you should not sit down. You should not fall down. You should walk. You should take that particular path which we, as a race living in this free country, we have to has to take up. And that is why she says that don't you fall now. For I'm still going on, honey. She says that why are you sitting down? Why are you losing heart? Why are you feeling depressed? Look at me, I've been still climbing up despite of all difficulties, problems and injustice which she has had to face in her life. She's still climbing on and on and on. I still been climbing, and life for me ain't been no crystal stair. So the poem starts with a particular line and ends in the same line. So this particular device of repetition is used in order to emphasize her indomitable spirit. Now, life hasn't been easy. It was full of difficulties, yet she hasn't stopped climbing on. There were times when there were happy moments. There were times when majority of the times were not happy moments. Majority of the times were quite desperate. Majority of the times were quite hopeless, full of problems. Yet she goes on and on and on and on. And she advises her son that he should not give up. He should not feel depressed, but he has to go on and on and on. So this is a very, look at the language of the poem. The language of the poem is very simple, but the message which actually comes out of this particular poem is universal. Of course, we have to situate the text and say that, it's a African American woman who's talking to her son. But if we could just take a liberty of taking that particular text from that soil, and if we could allow this poem to travel all over the world, I would say that any mother who is underprivileged would say similar things to her son, and that is why this poem is kind of universal, because it is all about hope, it is all about resilience, it is all about going on and on and on in life. And that is why this particular poem has become such an important poem in American history. So, what are the central themes of this poem? The central themes of this poem are resilience and maternal wisdom. Now, life is a very different bag of beans. Life can throw surprises at you. Life can at times be a very pleasant experience. On the other hand, it can be a very unpleasant experience. But whatever situation we find ourselves in, we will have to go on and on and on. And what I like about this poem, or what we should actually notice about this poem, that this piece of advice which is given by the mother to the son is devoid of any religious tinge. Now we have other poems where a person is speaking, a senior person is speaking to a junior person and is giving the advice, but that advice is sometimes wrapped up in the element of religion. This particular poem does not mention religion at all. It is deeply it's deeply materially rooted poem. It is a poem where the mother is giving advice to the son, not on the basis of any religious message, but she is actually treating her son as a person whom she could just pass on the message of her life. Her life has been full of this kind of problems, but she wants her son to continue, never to lose hope, never to lose heart. It seems that the son of this person, this speaker in the poem, is actually depressed, and that is why she's giving this piece of advice. So resilience is a very important theme of this particular poem. The second is maternal wisdom. Now, even I know if we look at the nature, you would see nature also teaches this very important thing. Majority of the species in the nature, it is the mother who actually brings up her young ones, and she teaches, she passes on all the skills which are required in order to survive in this hostile world, because the jungle is a very hostile terrain. You might lose your life at any point in time, and that is why any mother in the nature passes on a set of survival skills to her next generation. So this particular mother in this poem, who has been living her life in that hostile, racially segregated America, who has lived her life in these difficult situations, is actually passing on a set of skills which are required for that son to survive in that hostile, racially segregated United States of America. And that is why this maternal wisdom, this, I know I would again and again bring out the lack of religious tone in this particular poem, because we have seen where the seniors are advising the juniors, but the message is always wrapped up in the garb of religion. Here the mother is actually talking about her life, her indomitable spirit. She is not giving any soothing pill which religion sometimes provides. So she is not actually fooling the person. She's talking about the harsh realities of life, and at the same time she is teaching her son to go on and on and on in this particular poem. That is why this is such an important poem in American history, the history of American literature, and even in American history, I should say, because the next generations of the African American artists, or the public in general, they drew succor on this kind of literature, and that is why it is such an important particular poem. But look at the message of the poem, but let us not forget the language. The language is equally important to my mind, because the attempt is to give agency to the person who has been denied even the right to exist in that hostile polity. And that is why message, as well as this particular strong use of language, this choice, the political choice of using a particular dialect in this poem is very important for me. I hope you would read this poem and you would really enjoy this poem. Thank you very much.